Recently, this website, greatreset.com, was set up, and it states, the pause during lockdown created by the pandemic will result in a 7% decrease in global emissions in 2020. The UN states that we need a decrease of 7.6% every year until 2030 to avoid climate and ecological disaster. This means we need to maintain the same decrease every year as if we were living in lockdown. The challenge is that as we emerge from the pandemic, the pressure to go back to business as usual will intensify. But people don't want to go back. Only 23% of the UK public believe following lockdown, advertising should encourage people to consume, shop and fly like before lockdown. 77% believe it is the industry's responsibility to encourage people to behave more sustainably like during lockdown. Right now, we have a small window of opportunity to reset and shape the future we want. How about the future that the people want? The Great Reset is a creative industry movement to embed the positive environmental shifts that have happened during lockdown as the new normal. Our industry has power and influence, but we need lots of people to choose to use it. We must grab this opportunity to help shape a society that puts mankind and our planet's needs first. To do this, we need to reset ourselves to become agents of change, not just passive receivers of briefs. Reset our work so that what we create promotes sustainable values, attitudes, and behaviors. Reset our impact by reevaluating what we measure and celebrate as success. Well, you'd have to be a coincidence theorist to believe that the COVID-19 crisis and the Great Reset weren't connected from the very start. Especially when so conveniently the lockdowns led to a global reduction in CO2 emissions by 7%, which apparently is pretty close to the UN's target of reducing emissions by 7.6% every year until 2030. And by the way, that 7.6% figure was stated in an article on their website on the 26th of November 2019, long before the pandemic was declared. COVID-19 has been the much-needed accelerant for the Great Reset, a chance for the globalists to rebuild our entire world from the ground up and create their new world order out of chaos. The Great Reset is designed to bring about a fourth industrial revolution. For more on that, check out my previous video called The Great Reset and the Man Behind the Curtain, which is about the founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, and I was reading from an article on Winter Oak. Very good article, well worth a read. You can visit the World Economic Forum website or their YouTube channel to find out more about the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution for yourself. They've got plenty of videos on both subjects over there.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
Shape the system.
We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path. It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
Now is the time to think what history would say about this crisis. And now is the time for all of us to define our own role. What is it that would make it so that history would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset?
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world. Rebalancing investment, harnessing science and technology, and advancing the transition to net zero emissions, all elements of the Great Reset, are fundamental to building the future we need.
The future we need. Well, isn't it so convenient then that the COVID virus that is now no worse than a seasonal influenza came along to give you an excuse to push through global plans that you've wanted to pursue for years? Especially when, in his book from 2018, Shaping the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Klaus Schwab says, public-private data sharing agreements that break glass in case of emergency. These come into play only under pre-agreed emergency circumstances such as a pandemic and can help reduce delays and improve the coordination of first responders, temporarily allowing data sharing that would be illegal under normal circumstances. And wouldn't you know it, a convenient pandemic came out of nowhere just 2 years later. Now, I see this person is from the IMF, and that's a good segue because I wanted to talk about the IMF. Because apparently the IMF and the World Bank wanted President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus to place draconian restrictions on his people, including lockdowns, curfews, and to crash his economy. A bit like other countries have. In exchange, the government would be paid $940 million. He declined. By the way, for full confirmation, this is from Belta, which is the Belarus national broadcasting website. Belarus president unwilling to accept additional terms to get foreign loans. Minsk, 19th of June. Additional conditions which do not apply to the financial part are unacceptable for Belarus. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko said when speaking about external lending during a meeting to discuss support measures for the real economic sector on the part of the banking system, Belta has learned. Alexander Lukashenko asked the participants of the meeting how things were with the provision of foreign credit assistance to Belarus. What are our partners' requirements? It was announced that they can provide Belarus with $940 million in so-called rapid financing. How are things here? The head of state inquired. At the same time, he stressed that additional conditions, which do not apply to the financial part, are unacceptable for the country. We hear the demands. For example, to model our coronavirus response on that of Italy. I do not want to see the Italian situation to repeat in Belarus. We have our own country and our own situation, the president said. According to the president, the World Bank has showed interest in Belarus coronavirus response practices. It is ready to fund us 10 times more than it offered initially as a token of commendation for our efficient fight against the virus. The World Bank has even asked the Healthcare Ministry to share the experience. Meanwhile, the IMF continues to demand from us quarantine measures, isolation, a curfew. This is nonsense. We will not dance to anyone's tune, said the president. So, one has to wonder if so many of the governments around the world that are enforcing lockdowns, curfews, and economic destruction on their nations are in fact doing so because they took bribes? I don't know. It's an interesting question to ask, isn't it? You know what else is really coincidental? The World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab have been going on and on about the Fourth Industrial Revolution for a while now. But do you know who else has previously talked about it? Matt Hancock, Secretary of State for Health and Social Care in Britain, and the man pushing the COVID-19 police state on the British public through pseudoscience and scaremongering. I recently found the following article from gov.uk, an official UK government website. It reads, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's from the 16th of October 2017. Minister for Digital, Matt Hancock, addresses the all-party parliamentary group on the Fourth Industrial Revolution's autumn reception. Now, keep in mind, at the time, Matt Hancock was Minister of State for Digital and Culture. I'm going to read a few excerpts from his address. So, he said, and I'm delighted to speak alongside so many impressive colleagues who really understand this, and alongside Professor Klaus Schwab, who literally wrote the book on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Your work, bringing together, as you do, all the best minds on the planet, has informed what we are doing, and I'm delighted to work with you. For the first industrial revolution, the UK could claim to be the workshop of the world. Propelled by development of the steam engine, it reached its pinnacle in the mid-19th century. But the UK has not had the monopoly on waves of industrial revolution. Now, in the fourth revolution, we are determined to use our strengths to play a leading part. By its nature, the fourth industrial revolution is more collaborative than the first, and we will play our part. The UK is already a world leader in key technologies, AI, nano, and biotechnologies, and additive manufacturing, to name a few. Our industrial strategy outlines what we're doing to ensure the UK is a leader overall, and our digital strategy, embedded within the wider industrial strategy, sets out the 7 pillars on which we can build our success, and inside that fits our 5G strategy like a set of Russian dolls. Our strategy covers infrastructure, skills, rules and ethics of big data use, cybersecurity, supporting the tech sector, the digitization of industry, and digitization of government. All these are important. Today I want to focus on just 2 of those areas, skills and infrastructure. The fourth industrial revolution will change the kinds of jobs needed in industry. Our strong view is that as a nation, we must create the jobs of the future. Digital revolution brings with it disruption, and as the RSA so powerfully set out last month, the risk is not that we adopt new technologies that destroy jobs. The risk to jobs comes from not adopting new technologies. Our task is to support redeployment, not employment. Our goal must be to automate work, but humanize jobs, allow machines to do the dangerous, boring, and repetitive, and ensure we humans have the capacity to do the creative, empathetic, and interactive. We need a full spectrum skills response from school to retirement. So we now have coding in the curriculum from age 8. For those already in work, the Digital Skills Entitlement provides free access to basic training and promotes lifelong learning. His address concluded with, "Earlier this year, the Fourth Industrial Revolution was not a very well-known term, at least before it became a central topic at the World Economic Forum. It recently made its way into an item on BBC Breakfast television. This shows we've probably started to reach critical mass. It's a pleasure now to introduce the man who made the Fourth Industrial Revolution a household phrase, Professor Klaus Schwab." Something to think about there. Recently, in Boris Johnson's Build Back Better address, he talked about how Britain will defeat the COVID virus, and then he said the following.
But after all we've been through, it isn't enough just to go back to normal. We've lost too much. We've mourned too many. We've been through too much frustration and hardship just to settle for the status quo ante, to think that life can go on as it was before the plague. And it will not, because history teaches us that events of this magnitude, wars, famines, plagues, events that affect the vast bulk of humanity, as this virus has, they don't just come and go. They are more often than not the trigger for an acceleration of social and economic change, because we human beings will simply not content ourselves with a repair job. We see these moments as the time to learn and to improve on the world that went before. And that's why this government will build back better.
Why? Why can't Britain return to the way it was? Like how life returned to normal after the Spanish flu that killed orders of magnitude more people than COVID-19 has killed. That's what British people want, to go back to normal, so why can't they? But it seems now as if someone else has an agenda all of their own, and they wish to use this crisis as a chance to push through that agenda under the cover of an economic and social rebuilding process after COVID-19. But given that we know that the corporate mainstream media and our governments have been lying about everything to do with COVID-19, from the fatality figures, case numbers, the need for masks, lockdowns and business shutdowns, it seems more plausible that this crisis was nothing but a manufactured one from the very start, designed to create the disorder and economic chaos necessary to tear down the old system in order to make way for a new one.
And so we can't now define the mission of this country as merely to restore normality. That isn't good enough.
You mean it's not good enough for the likes of the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab?
In the depths of the Second World War, when just about everything had gone wrong, the government sketched out a vision of the post-war New Jerusalem that they wanted to build. And that's what we're doing now, in the teeth of this pandemic. We're resolving not to go back to 2019, but to do better, to reform our system of government, to renew our infrastructure, to spread opportunity more widely and fairly, and create the conditions for a dynamic recovery that is led not by the state, but by free enterprise. We need to move fast, not just to deal with the immediate economic fallout.
Let's move on a little bit in this speech, because I want to get to the part where he starts to talk about the green economy.
We effectively broke down the senseless barrier between further education and higher education, so that it's just as easy to get the funding you need for a training course in engineering or IT as for a degree in politics or economics. Because we're offering every adult 4 years of funded post-18 education, a lifetime skills guarantee, a lifetime skills guarantee.
Well, there's no such thing as free education, Boris. So I guess that means higher taxes in the future?
From internet shopping to working from home, it looks as though COVID has massively accelerated changes in the world of work.
Yes, and that was one of the goals of the Great Reset, to use COVID as an excuse to do exactly that.
And as old jobs are lost and new jobs are created, we're offering free training for adults without A-levels in vital skills, from adult care to wind turbine maintenance. And
wind turbine maintenance? You can see that the economy is being modified to fit into the new structure of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Green Agenda. People lose their jobs and they are then forced to retrain into tech or green economy jobs. Now, you've probably seen this image about a ballerina. Fatima's next job could be in cyber. She just doesn't know it yet. In other words, with the economy crashed and with social distancing in every public venue, it makes careers in things like the arts, dancing, music, comedy, it makes them unsustainable. And so those people are forced to retrain for a job where they will have to sit in front of a computer screen all day instead. You may have noticed that the antisocial and indeed anti-human shut-in lifestyle and work-from-home tech economy was pushed very hard during lockdown to get people used to doing everything online and in front of some kind of screen all day long. They were retraining humanity.
The COVID crisis is a catalyst for change.
That is certainly true. It is a catalyst for change. But I am of the belief that the COVID crisis was not an accident, but merely part of a plan to help reshape the world as the powerful elites see fit.
So we need to give people the chance to train for the new jobs that are being created every day. And there's one area where we are progressing with gale force speed, and that is the green economy. The green industrial revolution.
An industrial revolution, you say? Carry on.
That in the next 10 years will create hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs. I can today announce that the UK government has decided to become the world leader in low-cost clean power generation, cheaper than coal, cheaper than gas. And we believe that in 10 years' time, offshore wind will be powering every home in the country, with our target rising from 30 gigawatts to 40 gigawatts. You heard me right. Your kettle, your washing machine, your cooker, your heating, your plug-in electric vehicle, the whole lot of them, will get their juice cleanly and without guilt from the breezes that blow around these islands.
Well, this is certainly all very interesting, isn't it? Matt Hancock has been talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution for several years now. He would eventually become Secretary for Health and Social Care, and then, suddenly in 2020, himself and Prime Minister Boris Johnson would be in charge of a crisis that would enable them to enforce economic and social policies on the British people that would help to accelerate that very same Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Fourth Industrial Revolution being the brainchild of the World Economic Forum's Klaus Schwab, which is to be achieved through a Great Reset, the slogan of which is Build Back Better. You may have noticed that Joe Biden also likes to use this phrase.
We can do this. We can build back better. And I'm looking forward to getting started as soon as we can.
And here's some other examples of its usage. The UN used it in an article back in May of 2020, as you can see on screen. And here's an article from probonoaustralia.au dated April 29th, How Australia Can Build Back Better After Coronavirus. Friends of the Earth Europe have an article from April 23rd, EU Council, governments must act together to build back better. The World Economic Forum used the phrase many times, including on April 3rd, how to build back better after COVID-19. The phrase was also recently used at the Speech from the Throne in Canada.
The third foundation is to build back better to create a stronger, more resilient Canada.
This whole bit of Canadian pageantry is a bit odd to me, and why does it look like the cast of Pirates of the Caribbean are in attendance? Anyway, suffice to say, Build Back Better has been used all over the place as part of a plan to bring about the climate change agenda, which in itself is just complete totalitarianism, just like the COVID-19 lockdown and social restrictions, which overlap. Every aspect of an individual's life, and indeed the wider society and economy, is governed and regulated by the mandates of the global green ideology. I've previously mentioned this article from CNN from May 10th of this year, and I'll go through it briefly again. Our cities may never look the same again after the pandemic. From Auckland to Bogota, Urban planners are already adapting our cities to lockdown. But will the changes last? And which more radical design proposals, be it sewer monitors or epidemic skyscrapers, will shape the post-pandemic city? For advocates of walkable, unpolluted and vehicle-free cities, the past few weeks have offered an unprecedented opportunity to test the ideas they have long lobbied for. It's almost like that was the point, to test the ideas they've long lobbied for. With COVID-19 lockdowns vastly reducing the use of roads and public transit systems, city authorities from Liverpool to Lima are taking advantage by closing streets to cars, opening others to bicycles and widening sidewalks to help residents maintain the 6-foot distancing recommended by global health authorities. And to think, I thought it was just 2 weeks to flatten the curve. But here they are making permanent changes to cities to maintain the 6-foot social distancing recommendations. It's almost like this was never about a virus, and was in fact about a completely different agenda. Yes, it is certainly convenient how lockdowns and social distancing policies for COVID-19 just happen to dovetail perfectly with the radical climate change agenda that seeks to modify and reimagine the world around us. The article continues. In Oakland, California, almost 10% of roadways have been closed to through traffic, while Bogota, Colombia, has opened 47 miles of temporary bike lanes. New York has begun trialling 7 miles of open streets, with Auckland, Mexico City and Quito among the dozens of other world cities experimenting with similar measures. There are many purported benefits of reclaiming the streets during a pandemic. Encouraging cycling may reduce crowding on buses and subways, where people can struggle to get distance from one another. Vehicle-free roads also offer those without access to parks the ability to exercise safely. Other urban initiatives have been introduced to directly control the spread of the virus. Cities in the US, Canada, and Australia have reconfigured traffic lights so that people no longer need to touch crosswalk buttons. In any case, many pedestrian crossings are equipped with placebo buttons that have no impact on whether the lights go green. It is unclear if these urban interventions will continue once the pandemic is over. I have a strange feeling they will. Milan plans to build 22 miles of new cycle lanes and permanently widen sidewalks after its lockdown lifts. Authorities in Hungary's capital, Budapest, have suggested that its new bike lanes may become permanent if the measures prove favourable, while planning officials in Providence, Rhode Island, have said crossings will now remain button-free. I also recently came across this article from Forbes from October 9th. Bicycles and buses will be future's dominant modes of urban mobility, predict 346 transport experts. A significant new report supported by the World Economic Forum, again, the World Economic Forum, which of course was founded by Mr. Great Reset himself, Klaus Schwab. A significant new report supported by the World Economic Forum argues there must be a transport transformation if the planet is to benefit from the Paris Agreement's decarbonization commitments. Remember from earlier on in this video, I read from the Great Reset website where it talked about the UN's claim that a 7.6% decrease in carbon emissions is needed by 2030, and how I connected that back to that very claim made on the UN website back in November of 2019, how the UN said that we must cut global emissions by 7.6% every year for the next decade to meet 1.5 degrees Celsius Paris target. Yeah, turns out COVID-19 and all the social restrictions and lockdowns were designed to do that. They certainly had nothing to do with a virus or a pandemic. That's why they have to fudge the death figures. That's why the news reports only ever talk about new cases from testing and hardly ever mention deaths. That's why you probably don't know anybody who's had COVID, let alone died from it. It's time to wake up, humanity. Some of us have realized that this was a scam 7 months ago. The Transport for Under 2 Degrees project published its Way Forward report on October 8th, arguing that governments around the world should stop subsidizing motoring and must instead build cycleways and wider sidewalks to anticipate the likely future of active transport in cities. It's almost like our governments take their orders from organizations like the World Economic Forum, because that's what's happening all over the place. Coronavirus, see? It links into coronavirus right here. The report, Transport for Under 2 Degrees, The Way Forward, acknowledges that the massive drop in motoring during national lockdowns showed that change is possible. Responses to COVID-19 have shown potential for systemic changes to the mobility sector. It's almost like that was the point. I mean, I'm blue in the face at this point. It should be so incredibly transparent right now. There is now an opportunity to align governance structures in the mobility sectors towards a more, buzzword bingo ahead, sustainable, resilient, efficient and inclusive system, adds the report, which highlights 10 key insights that policymakers worldwide should consider to decarbonize their transport systems. The insights are hardly novel. Transport can only be decarbonized if married to a massive expansion of wind and solar power, for instance. But the predictions of how we will travel in cities and rural areas within 30 years will come as a shock to those who remain wedded to their cars. The experts say that personal car use in the cities of the future won't be sustainable. I guess we're supposed to just take their word for it. And policymakers will have to legislate to remove cars from the urban environment. I hope you're not a car lover. If this occurs, the majority of the experts believe the full decarbonization of the transport sector is possible by mid-century. However, forget clever fixes. The experts overwhelmingly agree. Well, if they overwhelmingly agree, I guess that makes it fact, right? That instead of tech solutions, people must be forced to switch away from planet-damaging transport modes. Is there any evidence that they're actually planet-damaging, though? There is no technological solution to a societal problem, said Agora Verker, I'm not going to pronounce that correctly, Director Christian Hochfield at the launch of the study, which was staged digitally. In a statement, Hochfield added, "Only business models that comply with the Paris goals are future-proof." I guess I'll just trust the Paris goals as if they're gospel, right? Most of the experts believe taxes must be raised on fuel to disincentivize its use. The phase-out of combustion engines must also be accelerated, say the experts. But don't think that electric cars or drones will solve congestion or other urban problems. Given their high energy consumption per unit or passenger carried, drones will most likely stay a niche technology, say the experts surveyed. Of initial urgency, says the report, is reorienting public money currently spent on fossil fuel subsidies. The backbone of climate-friendly urban transport will be public transport, active modes of transport, shared mobility services, as well as sustainable urban planning, says the report, adding that investments in public transport along with the promotion of cycling and walking have to be prioritised. Again, isn't it lucky that this virus came along so that the population's movements could be restricted, carbon emissions being reduced, and less people would be moving around the place? Of course, I don't buy into the climate change carbon con because it's based on pseudoscience. In actuality, the more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the more green the planet becomes. But the globalists constantly need a narrative of fear, of terrible danger, in order to maintain control of the population. But you can see now why they want to convince people to work from home more. It's obviously not because of the virus, it's because they want less people out and about in general in the name of reducing human movement in order to lower global CO2 emissions. The digital economy and big tech will be the ultimate winners as people will have to use their technologies and services more and more. They basically experimented on humanity with 2 and 5 kilometer travel restrictions in order to see if people would accept living their lives within an extremely small area. And as Klaus Schwab explained in his book COVID-19 and the Great Reset, and this is a quote, "In one form or another, social and physical distancing measures are likely to persist after the pandemic itself subsides, justifying the decision, in many companies from different industries, to accelerate automation. After a while, the enduring concerns about technological unemployment will recede as societies emphasize the need to restructure the workplace in a way that minimizes close human contact. Indeed, automation technologies are particularly well suited to a world in which human beings can't get too close to each other or are willing to reduce their interactions." So much for 2 weeks to flatten the curve. This hellish anti-human dystopia, where we're supposed to treat each other like pariahs and walking biohazards, is supposed to continue indefinitely. Our lingering and possibly lasting fear of being infected with a virus, COVID-19 or another, will thus speed the relentless march of automation, particularly in the fields most susceptible to automation. Basically, he was saying that social distancing is about increasing automation in certain jobs and industries because human beings have been convinced that they can't get close to each other anymore for fear of contracting a virus. So this entire thing has been about social engineering humanity to turn them into docile drones who live lives that conform to the anti-human dystopian nightmare of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Similar changes have been made over the past few months here in Ireland, with new cycle lanes in Dublin and expanded bus corridors and more pedestrianisation of streets and expanded pathways. Also, here's an article from October 8th from the Irish Times that's related to this. Future of people driving around country in private cars is fantasy built on cheap oil. Dublin city architect calls for permanent allocation of open public space in Dublin. Dublin city architect Ali Grehan has said the future of people driving around the country in private cars is a moribund fantasy built on cheap oil. Ms. Grehan is advocating for the permanent allocation of open public space in the capital following its increased temporary use to limit the spread of COVID-19. She was one of a number of speakers at Thursday's Open House Dublin online big debate, Dublin's Fair City, organised by the Irish Architecture Foundation, discussing the creation of city space in the context of the pandemic experience. "We can do astonishing things when we have to," Ms. Grehan said, regarding the change in social behaviour and Dublin City Council's COVID-19 mobility measures that aim to free up space for alternative mobility. "Just at the very basic level, those temporary measures, we do need to make them beautiful. We need to make them permanent. I think we absolutely need to give more street space to pedestrians, to people of all abilities," she said, "and enable people to move around sustainably and give less space to private cars. Private car use is a fantasy built on this idea that we can all move around on a whim, and travel around the country in our private cars is a fantasy that is built on cheap oil, and that is on the way out." Well, I sure hope not, because private cars are freedom. Andrew Dargan, county architect at Dunleary Rathdown County Council, said COVID-19 had coincided with the beginning of efforts to tackle climate change in cities. Again, is it starting to make sense? And noted the recent 3.6-kilometre coastal cycleway between Blackrock and Sandy Cove had been considered for a long time. "It took the emergency that is COVID to bring it to reality," she said. Reimagined public spaces had also come about. I find it most incredible that during this apparent big scary Spanish flu type pandemic, that governments the world over would have taken this opportunity to plough taxpayers' money into infrastructural developments and modifications of streets, towns and cities. One would have thought the priority would have been hospitals, but given that they were mostly empty and full of dancing nurses, I guess the best way to handle this so-called COVID pandemic is instead to focus on climate change by increasing cycle and bus lanes and pedestrianisation. Because, as you can see from this entire video so far, we're not living through a pandemic. We're living through a scam to bring about a world of tighter top-down government control, as the 2010 Lockstep Rockefeller document described it. In fact, that document was, in my opinion, almost like a blow-by-blow screenplay of what we're currently living through. And by the way, keep the Rockefeller Foundation in your mind for a moment as we move on to this. From the World Economic Forum, Common Pass, in collaboration with the Commons Project, a non-profit public trust building global digital services and platforms for the common good. Ah yes, the common good, that phrase that signifies collective rights over individual human rights. The World Economic Forum is supporting the development and launch of Common Pass, an initiative which aims to develop a global, interpretable framework to safely restore cross-border travel to pre-pandemic levels. The challenge, as countries around the world work to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic and restart their economies and tourism, they all face the challenge of how to reopen their borders and allow international travel to resume while protecting their population's health. Protecting their health or restricting their movements and freedoms? You decide. The current patchwork of policies and ever-changing border entry and health screening requirements has made international travel incredibly complex, leaving airlines and border agencies uncertain about the validity of test results and passengers unsure of what is being asked of them. The solution, Common Pass, aims to develop and launch a standard global model to enable people to securely document and present their COVID-19 status, either as test results or an eventual vaccination status, to facilitate international travel and border crossing while keeping their health information private, recognizing that countries will make sovereign decisions on border entry and health screening requirements, including whether or not to require tests or what type of test to require. Common Pass serves as a neutral platform which creates the interoperability needed for the various travel bubbles to connect and for countries to trust one another's data by leveraging global standards. Okay, this sounds a great deal like the health passports we've been talking about for quite a while now. So let's take a look at the World Economic Forum video about this from August 24th. That woman looks like she's wearing a nose bag on her face, like a horse would wear. Anyway, this Common Pass is described as follows.
Common Pass is a platform that lets people safely and securely collect their health information, whether it is a negative COVID test result or eventually a record of a COVID vaccination, manage that information, control it themselves, and then be able to let that information be used to demonstrate that they have had a negative test or they have been vaccinated so they can get on an airplane or travel to another country.
Because no longer are people allowed to determine for themselves if they're sick or not. COVID-19 has been described as being so deadly that you have to be tested to know if you have it. From now on, it seems that human beings are expected to be treated like cattle, to be tagged, traced, and vaccinated. If you test positive for the nonsense PCR test that mostly finds antibodies to either COVID or debris from previous coronaviruses, you won't be able to travel or live a normal life. As you know, I've also discussed such apps for just generally getting around the place, like the Health Passport Ireland app.
Your COVID-19 status will efficiently display as green, amber or red, dependent on your test results. This allows us to go about our daily activities in a safer way. We can all use Health Passport Ireland in many ways, such as travel, hospitality, education, healthcare, construction, offices, entertainment, visits and much, much more. Naturally, the validity of your COVID-19 test will expire over time, so an automatic reminder will be sent when it's time to be tested again.
Absolute technocracy. Bye-bye freedom. If you're not in this digital population control network, you won't be able to live a normal life, hold down a job or travel anywhere. Mind you, there's nothing normal about a life in a digital population control network. And why did I mention Rockefeller earlier? Because Common Pass was developed in collaboration with the Commons Project. And if you go to their website, you can see their trustees. You can see their names and organizations that they work for here. And then scroll down a little bit, and this gentleman is Rajiv Shah, MD, President, the Rockefeller Foundation. Is it just a coincidence that they would be involved in such a project, given that the Rockefeller document from 2010 called Scenarios for the Future of Technology and International Development, with its lockstep scenario narrative, said the following? During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at the entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. Again, this was a scenario written in 2010. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics and transnational terrorism to environmental crisis and rising poverty, Hegelian dialectic, problem-reaction solution, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. At first, the notion of a more controlled world gained wide acceptance and approval. Citizens willingly gave up some of their sovereignty and their privacy to more paternalistic states, in exchange for greater safety and stability. Citizens were more tolerant and even eager for top-down direction and oversight, and national leaders had more latitude to impose order in the ways they saw fit. In developed countries, this heightened oversight took many forms. Biometric IDs for all citizens, for example, and tighter regulation of key industries, whose stability was deemed vital to national interests. Is any of this sounding familiar? In many developed countries, enforced cooperation with a suite of new regulations and agreements slowly but steadily restored order and, importantly, economic growth. By the way, I found another Forbes article, and this is from 2010. Why the World Health Organization faked a pandemic. By the way, I just thought I'd let you know at this point in the video that yesterday when I started scripting this video that you're watching, the Forbes article I'm about to read to you, which again is 10 years old, was live on the Forbes website, and it's subsequently been removed from their website. So, sometime between yesterday and today, this 10-year-old article was removed. I had to use an archive of it from the Wayback Machine in order to find it. I'm going to include the URL on screen and in the source links below. I wonder why they removed this article. Well, maybe if I read you the article, perhaps the reason might become clear. The World Health Organization has suddenly gone from crying the sky is falling like a cackling chicken little to squealing like a sick pig. The reason? Charges that the agency deliberately fomented swine flu hysteria. The world is going through a real pandemic. The description of it as a fake is wrong and irresponsible, the agency claims on its website. A World Health Organization spokesman declined to specify who or what gave this description, but the primary accuser is hard to ignore. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, a human rights watchdog, is publicly investigating the World Health Organization's motives in declaring a pandemic. Indeed, the chairman of its influential health committee, epidemiologist Wolfgang Wodarg, has declared that the false pandemic is one of the greatest medicine scandals of the century. Even within the agency, the director of the World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Epidemiology in Munster, Germany, Dr. Ulrich Kehl, has essentially labelled the pandemic a hoax. We are witnessing a gigantic misallocation of resources, $18 billion so far in terms of public health, he said. This all sounds very familiar. It's almost like they tried this whole scamdemic thing before, but it wasn't successful, and so they tried it again 10 years later. The article continues, they're right. This wasn't merely overcautiousness or simple misjudgment. The pandemic declaration and all the klaxon ringing since reflect sheer dishonesty motivated not by medical concerns, but political ones. Unquestionably, swine flu has proved to be vastly milder than ordinary seasonal flu. Just like COVID then. It kills at 1/3 to 1/10 the rate, according to US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates. Data from other countries like France and Japan indicate it's far tamer than that. Indeed, judging by what we've seen in New Zealand and Australia, where the epidemics have ended, and by what we're seeing elsewhere in the world, we'll have considerably fewer flu deaths this season than normal. That's because swine flu muscles aside seasonal flu, acting as a sort of inoculant against the far deadlier strain. Did the World Health Organization have any indicators of this mildness when it declared the pandemic in June? Absolutely, as I wrote at the time. We were then fully 11 weeks into the outbreak, and swine flu had only killed 144 people worldwide, the same number who die of seasonal flu worldwide every few hours, an estimated 250,000 to 500,000 per year by the World Health Organization's own numbers. The mildest pandemics of the 20th century killed at least 1 million people. This could have been written about COVID-19 today. And just like swine flu, we're now seeing that COVID-19 is less deadly than a bad annual flu outbreak. I have to wonder, what were the primary reasons why the COVID-19 scamdemic of 2020 was so much more successful than the swine flu scamdemic of 2009? I can only speculate. Perhaps in that time, the globalists and governments have forged tighter partnerships and obtained tighter control over the mainstream media that helped to push the pandemic scaremongering. They also employed 2 additional tools, the use of questionable PCR testing and the lie that asymptomatic carriers can drive pandemics. But how could the organization declare a pandemic when its own official definition required simultaneous epidemics worldwide with enormous numbers of deaths and illness? Severity, that is, the number of deaths, is crucial because every year flu causes a global spread of disease. Easy. In May, in what it admitted was a direct response to the outbreak of swine flu the month before, World Health Organization promulgated a new definition matched to swine flu that simply eliminated severity as a factor. You could now have a pandemic with 0 deaths. Under fire, the organization is boldly lying about the change, to which anybody with an internet connection can attest. In a mid-January virtual conference, World Health Organization swine flu chief Keiji Fukuda, I may not be pronouncing that correctly, stated, "Did World Health Organization change its definition of a pandemic?" The answer is no. World Health Organization did not change its definition. 2 weeks later, at a PACE conference, he insisted, having severe deaths has never been part of the World Health Organization definition. They did it, but why? In part, it was CYA for the World Health Organization. The agency was losing credibility over the refusal of avian flu H5N1 to go pandemic and kill as many as 150 million people worldwide, as its flu SAR had predicted in 2005. So, it would seem as if the World Health Organization has cried wolf many times in the past and are doing so again now in 2020. But this time, they were successful in convincing the population of the entire planet that they're living in a deadly pandemic. Well, I guess if at first you don't succeed, try again. The fact that they have tried before and most people have forgotten these past attempted scams just goes to show how short memories really are. Around the world, nations heeded the warnings and spent vast sums developing vaccines and making other preparations. So when swine flu conveniently trotted in, the World Health Organization essentially crossed out avian and inserted swine, and World Health Organization Director General Margaret Chan arrogantly boasted, "The world can now reap the benefits of investments over the last 5 years in pandemic preparedness." But there's more than bureaucratic self-interest at work here. Bizarrely enough, the World Health Organization has also exploited its phony pandemic to push a hard-left political agenda. In a September speech, World Health Organization Director General Chan said, "Ministers of health should take advantage of the devastating impact swine flu will have on poorer nations to get out the message that changes in the functioning of the global economy are needed to distribute wealth on the basis of values like community, solidarity, equity, and social justice." She further declared, "It should be used as a weapon against international policies and systems that govern financial markets, economies, commerce, trade, and foreign affairs." Sound familiar? A fake pandemic being used as a cover to push other economic and political agendas. Chan's dream now lies in tatters. All the World Health Organization has done, says Paces Woodard, is to destroy much of the credibility that they should have, which is invaluable to us if there's a future scare that might turn out to be a killer on a large scale. Well, actually, this time they did try the same trick again, a decade later, and this time they were successful, and in so doing, the door has been opened for even more nefarious players to push through insidious plans that would essentially enslave all of humanity. The Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, mandatory vaccinations, the totalitarian green agenda, with everything that entails for the human race. These things must be exposed and must be stopped. But it's certainly very, very interesting that this Forbes article was removed only yesterday. It wasn't removed last year in 2019 or the year before that or the year before that or the year before that. It's been up there for 10 years and it was only removed yesterday after a few people started to talk about it on social media. Why do you think that was, dear listener? Why do you think it was removed? Does someone now believe that people should no longer be able to read it? Could it be that an article from 10 years ago was erased in order to help protect a narrative in the present? I don't know. I will conclude this video by saying thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to me on BitChute, as I suspect my YouTube channel has fewer days ahead than there are behind. You can of course download my content and share it wherever you wish. Feel free to add translations. Thank you again for your continued support of my work and for liking and commenting and supporting me over on Subscribestar and my website. Take care, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.